Jesus predicted in Luke 21:11 that pestilences in various places would be a sign of his coming. Is today's pandemic related? Find out on today's episode of A View from the Wall.
Join I Am a Watchman Ministries Managing Editor Joe Kerr with co-host Dylan Burrows, bringing you a fascinating discussion regarding the importance of Bible prophecy and Christian living today as it relates to our responsibility as believers to be watchmen. This is A View from the Wall.
Welcome to A View from the Wall. This is Dylan Burrows here with co-host Joseph Kerr, and we're glad to join you today. The end times predictions of the Bible often discuss disease or pestilence, including a prophecy of the fourth horseman of the apocalypse who will kill 1/4 of all people with disease. With a global pandemic, many have questioned whether the COVID-19 virus may play a role in these and other end times predictions. To answer, we are joined today with prophecy expert Dr. Mark Hitchcock. He serves as pastor of Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, and is a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. He's the author of over 30 books on Bible prophecy, including his latest title, Corona Crisis: Plagues, Pandemics, and the Coming Apocalypse. Dr. Hitchcock, welcome back to A View from the Wall.
Oh, thanks for having me again. Great to be with you guys.
Well, as we start 2021, many people were glad to end the past year. 2020 was a difficult one, and people hoped that this year would be a fresh start. But we continue to face the COVID-19 virus, vaccinations, and much more. Let's start off by talking about how is any of this possibly related to the Bible's prophecies?
Well, thank you for asking that. Yes, with the COVID-19, obviously this, plague now in America, is taking the lives of almost half of a million people. And, it's global, it's worldwide. And so, naturally people want to ask, hey, how does that fit in with Luke 21, where it says there will be plagues and pestilence in the end? And also in Revelation 6, mentions a fourth of the earth is going to die from the sword and from famine, and mentions the wild beasts of the earth there. And so people wonder about that. My view is when you read in Luke 21 and you read in Revelation 6, those are plagues and pestilence that will occur during the tribulation period. Because if you look at in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 are all parallel accounts of the final great discourse, the Olivet Discourse it's called, that Jesus gave, where he talked about the future and what was going to be in the end. Those are very similar in order to what you have in Revelation 6 with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, these first four of the seal judgments. And so since those two are very parallel to each other, wherever you put Revelation 6, you have to put the sermon that Jesus gave from the Mount of Olives, and vice versa. So I believe that these plagues that are spoken of there are ones that will happen during the time of the tribulation period. And we're not in that time period yet. So I don't think coronavirus or COVID is one of those. But what I do think we see is we see a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. But I think there's also a lot of stage setting that this is doing because, we've got all this track and trace technology now.
Right.
There's all kinds of restrictions that are being placed on people's lives. So all this stuff I think that's kind of happening in the wake of or kind of along with COVID, while COVID itself is not a fulfillment of those prophecies, it's just a foreshadow of them. A lot of the things going on around it, government's going into massive debt. There's been $20 trillion of stimulus worldwide poured into economies. In America, if this package that's out there now is approved, it's going to be $6 trillion. So countries going into just massive debt, which could trigger inflation or hyperinflation in the future. So there's all kinds of things that are happening that I think are stage setting or paving the way for the rise of a global ruler. And you look at our world today, people want somebody who's got a plan, knows how to come in and take care of these problems. And,
right.
And we see all of this is being used today as a pretext to gain more power by governments and to, get the citizenry to do the things they want them to do. So it's this is kind of a dress rehearsal in some ways, I think, for what the Bible says is coming with an ultimate final world ruler, the Antichrist. I see that happening, and I think a lot of people do, with all the greater government control that's taking place. It's setting the stage for that perfectly.
You pointed out the list of things that are going to be last days precursors, and one of them is the way that the world will view truth and lies. I noticed this week that the Biden administration, using the New York Times, floated the idea of a reality czar. This would be somebody who presumably would have the power to decide what's true and what's not, basically setting up a ministry of truth. It reminds me of the propaganda ministry back under Hitler. But what could possibly go wrong with that scenario, right? Let's put somebody in the government in charge of deciding what's true and what's disinformation. That sounds like what you were describing with the world being programmed for a false prophet and an antichrist.
No, that's true. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, and back in George Orwell in 1984, I think there was something called the Ministry of Truth there. Maybe I don't have to go back and read that again, but so it truly is Orwellian. People use that term. That's fraught with so many problems. First of all, just history. People go back and read history, but history as it's taught is not always just the facts. It's someone's interpretation of what happened. The same thing is true of things that are happening presently. People see things differently. So, well, this is the true way to take this. We can all agree on facts. What happened at the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, we know the date that it happened, and we know basically what happened. But people's interpretation of that, or we know we had an election, in 2020 in November. You can set the dates for all those things. There are certain historical facts everybody agrees on, but what happened during that election? Were there things that were untoward that were going on? If you just come in and say, hey, nothing untoward happened, you can't say that anymore. So, that's a frightening thought, just, from a standpoint of our Constitution and what we have here in America with the First Amendment. But biblically, you're right. It's that's exactly what the false prophet will do. There's the Antichrist, who's going to be this world political ruler, but then he has this henchman, this lieutenant in Revelation 13, who's called the false prophet. He's the beast from the earth, and he's going to be the one who's going to promote that Antichrist or that first beast and do everything he can. Like you said, it's kind of a propaganda minister for him, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we see. And that's what totalitarian regimes do. And it's never been part of what's happened here in America. We want robust debate, and part of robust debate is people are going to say things that are false. But we would agree that there's all kinds of things being said that are false all the time.
Right.
So it's whose vision and whose view of truth is going to be put upon people. And that's a frightening thought either way. I don't want somebody who's a very conservative person deciding what truth is, or a very liberal person. That needs to be filtered out and sifted out in the marketplace of ideas as people bring their ideas to the table. That's the way our country has always worked.
Well, that's a good way to put it. And we enjoy as Americans this concept of free speech, but it's increasingly under attack. And that's another issue when we look at the end times that is very important today when we look at people who can control access to information like never before. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about this and other issues here on A View from the Wall. Stick with us.
From I Am a Watchman Ministries, here's today's I Am a Watchman Minute.
Do you know the story of the prophet Amos? He lived a humble life, was from a rather obscure place, worked as a shepherd and itinerant farmer, a tender of sycamore trees. He was not a priest, not of a noble line, and not educated, but God loved him and called him to a mighty work. Amos was a prophet, and he warned the people that God was not pleased with how they were living. He told the people that God had established a, quote, plumb line, expectations that he wanted his people to follow. And Amos told them that judgment was coming and all needed to be ready. I believe if Amos lived today, his message would be the same. Visit IamAWatchman.com for resources to help you be God's voice in such a time as this.
Be bold, be faithful, be a watchman. IamAWatchman.com.
Welcome back to A View from the Wall. As Joe and I talk with Dr. Mark Hitchcock, author of Corona Crisis and many best-selling prophecy books, we want to discuss how some of the increased global controls in our society seem to point toward the predictions found in the Bible. A good example is what we're seeing today with the growing global power of our time, including the future global cashless society and its possible connection to prophecy. What concerns do you see in this area of this cashless society?
Well, when you think about, there not being any money or being any cash that's available, there's a lot of positives to that. A lot of people look at it and say it's going to get rid of counterfeiting, drug trade,
Sure.
all the disease that comes from people handling money, and with COVID, all these kinds of things. So there's all kinds of practical reasons I think will be given to go cashless. Now, one of the desires of Klaus Schwab and the Davos Group, the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. That they're talking, that's one of the goals they have is a cashless society. And of course, one of the reasons for that is, again, you can get rid of everything happening on the black market. You can get taxes, people can't evade taxes, and you can control people's spending much more easily. There can be no black markets. You're going to know everything everybody's doing if it's cashless. And I really think that's what the Bible predicts. The Bible never says there'll be a cashless society, but really the biblical entry point to think about that is in Revelation 13, 16 to 18, which says that this coming world ruler, the Antichrist, we mentioned earlier, his henchman, the false prophet, they're going to control the world economy. No one's going to be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast upon the right hand or upon their forehead. Now, for that to take place, for there to be this global control of the economy, many people believe, and I would be among those, that it's going to have to be cashless. Because again, if you have money and have cash, you can always go around the system, to some kind of black market and all of that. Now, people can barter things for a while, but before long, you run out of things to barter.
Right.
And people are going to have to be in this system that's cashless. And, that's just another way to secure control over people's lives. People will have to use, their smartphone or some kind of, identification with their thumb or their iris and their eye or whatever it is to identify that they're the person who's using the smartphone or whatever. But all of this is going to be, it's all going to be online. It's all going to be done through, all this technology. And so they'll be able to control it all. And that's the ultimate goal in all this, is to control the economy, to control world commerce. And that's exactly what the Bible says is going to happen in the future. So we see it coming. I think down in, Venezuela, they're trying to eliminate cash in that country. Of course, they're having a terrible economic crisis. So you got all these cyber currencies and all these various things that are out there now that, even Warren Buffett says he doesn't understand, the Bitcoin and all that stuff. He doesn't understand it. I certainly don't. But
Right.
But that's where everything is headed. And that's the desire. That's the goal of these global elites. And we can expect to see that, I think, happening, probably accelerating greatly in the days and years to come.
Sure.
Let's talk about how that affects the church. We've enjoyed over the last few years of the Trump administration where largely our values as a church and as Christians aligned with what was coming out of Washington on many occasions, but we don't necessarily anticipate that being the case going forward, at least for the next few years. So talk about how things have changed in this country, specifically how it's affected the church, and what we can expect as Christians as our faith comes under attack here in America.
Yeah, I think there's a few things we need to keep in mind. I teach at Dallas Seminary, but I'm also a pastor of a church. I've been here 29 years at our church and seen a lot of things happen during that period of time. One thing I do think we need to do as believers, we need to remain positive and joyful. I think I've seen a lot of Christians in the last months kind of moping around and sad and, just kind of gloomy. And, God's still on the throne. Heaven has an occupied throne. We have to remember that. John was caught up to heaven. The first thing he saw is, he says, I saw one seated on a throne. And I think we have to remember that. Presidents come and go. They serve 4 years, 8 years, but God reigns forever. And first of all, I think we need to keep that perspective,
Yes.
whatever happens here on this earth. I do think that the government, though, has been coming after Christians, will continue to. I think what we see in our culture today would be kind of akin to what you have in the book of 1 Peter. Christians, they aren't being martyred. They're not being, killed. They're not being beaten for their faith, at least in America. But it's kind of what I call a soft persecution. We're marginalized. We're mocked, maligned. kind of made fun of, considered to be not very smart for what we believe. And I think what they're going to do initially is they're going to come after tax-exempt status. I think that will be a way that they're going to try to use to silence people, is say, if you hold these certain views, you no longer get tax-exempt status, which is going to obviously hurt ministries greatly financially. So I think that's one of the initial things that they'll do. Then I think they're going to begin to, look at people who hold certain viewpoints and, deny people employment, deny them jobs in certain places. Certainly the government, if we'll try to do that. I think they're already right now, from what I understand, in our defense department, they're looking at people, who are in the National Guard and these groups. What are their political beliefs? Well, if someone's shown to be a traitor to the United States, certainly we don't want them in serving in the military. But if someone just voted for a certain political candidate or has certain political beliefs, that person can no longer serve in the military or in the National Guard. This is the kind of thing. It's kind of a purge, that's taking place. They're trying to purge people out who don't hold those beliefs. And the more that happens, the more people that are Christians and do hold to a biblical worldview, the more that they're marginalized, the more the culture will begin to look down on them. And then that will lead ultimately, I think, to, soft persecution we see kind of now, leading to, a full-blown persecution that will take place, those who don't fall in line and agree with, with the powers that be. And we see that already with, transgender and with gay marriage and with a lot of these issues. And, if you don't fall in line with those things, you're a pariah. And so that's where it's headed, which ultimately then you get into, again, the tribulation period and the Antichrist. You don't take his mark or take his name upon your right hand or forehead, you're killed, you're beheaded. So that's where it's ultimately headed. Now, how far it will get before the rapture comes and we get to that full-blown stage, I don't know. No one does. But that's the direction that it's headed, and we can see it clearly today. America is kind of the last bastion of security and freedom in the world today, and we see that quickly eroding.
Right. Well, you see that in countries elsewhere already where there are hate crime laws, hate speech laws. So if you say the wrong thing, you can be legally subject to fines or even to imprisonment if you don't agree with the mainstream thoughts or the global thought of the time. And even big tech censorship in our own country is going that direction right now. So it seems to be a big topic at the moment and one we have to watch out for. When we come back, we'll talk more about this and other issues with Dr. Mark Hitchcock here on A View from the Wall. So stick with us.
The rapture can happen at any time. You may be ready, but are your friends and family spiritually prepared for the coming of the Lord? What will happen to those left behind? We've created a new resource to help you help them. It's called the Rapture Kit. Included in the Rapture Kit is a Bible and vital information on what the rapture is and how to prepare for what's to come. The Rapture Kit also includes 8 books on prophecy, apologetics, the Christian walk, and being a watchman for the Lord, plus a number of video and audio teachings, all preloaded on an 8-gigabyte flash drive. Become more strategic and active in your witnessing. Warn the lost about the coming rapture, and help individuals in the post-rapture world be drawn to Christ, equipping them to become the next generation of ministry leaders. Learn more and order at rapturekit.org.
Welcome back to A View from the Wall. As we continue our discussion with Dr. Mark Hitchcock today, we want to briefly mention his book that is out, The Corona Crisis. You can pick up a copy from anywhere books are sold, or also pick up a copy at IamAWatchman.com through our bookstore. And we encourage you to check that out and our other resources at IamAWatchman.com. And in this segment, we want to spend some time talking about the place that's the centerpiece of Bible prophecy, the nation of Israel. It's such an important part of the future plans of the end times, yet this new administration seems to be changing its emphasis regarding relations with this important nation. What are some of the ways Israel is especially important in Bible prophecy that we need to know about today?
Well, Israel's the super sign of Bible prophecy. Many people have said that. It's not original with me, but that's really true. They're the super sign because so many other prophecies in the Bible are dependent upon Israel being a nation. For instance, the event that starts the 7-year tribulation period, that final period of this age, begins in Daniel 9:27 with a future Antichrist making a treaty, a 7-year treaty with the nation of Israel. Well, obviously, you can't make that treaty if Israel doesn't exist. So Israel has to exist for that treaty to be made. Now, what's fascinating is that treaty appears to be some kind of a peace treaty, some kind of a peace agreement. And we look at our world today, and all of a sudden, all these nations are lining up to have some type of treaty, peace treaties, or you can call it a normalization of relations or whatever. But that hadn't happened in 25 years. You had Egypt back in 1979 that did that, Jordan in 1994. Then it's been 25 years. And all of a sudden, we've had the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, we've had the Sudan, Morocco just did that recently. And they say that there are many other nations, that are lined up. And that's one of the things that many of us are hoping that the Biden administration doesn't mess up. It's this,
right.
Continuation of these things. Now, again, these are not the fulfillment of Daniel 9:27. They're called the Abraham Accords, by the way, which is a fascinating, term for this. But it's amazing. But these aren't that peace treaty because the Antichrist hasn't come yet, and we're not in the tribulation period. But again, all these things we're seeing, I know I use this term quite a bit, but it's the setup. This is the stage setting. It's the foreshadowing of that that's coming. And the Antichrist is going to come, and he may make a treaty, or it may even, that word can also imply he may enforce a treaty, that's already in effect. So these are the things we see that are happening that are so significant. And, Israel's going to get attacked in the end times while that peace treaty is in effect, while they're kind of let their guard down. And that invasion is recounted in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And the nations that are mentioned there are the main enemies of Israel today. Russia is mentioned, but primarily Iran, ancient Persia. And, I'm concerned that the Biden administration is going to, do what happened during the Obama administration, kind of go soft on Iran again and allow them to, gain access to nuclear weapons and cross that nuclear finish line. So, again, you just got to look at our world today. You look at Israel; there they are, surrounded by this sea of enemies. All of a sudden, there's some peace going on, but the nations that are said to be their enemies in the end, Russia, Iran, some of these other nations, are really in place for what the Bible predicts for the end times. So Israel's the key player. They're the key place in the world to watch. Israel has been called, God's timepiece. They're God's prophetic clock. And just the fact that they're back there in the land today, almost 40% of the Jews in the world today live in Israel. And all these other things that are happening, they're very significant. And that's happening the same time we're seeing all these other things happening. So there's a convergence of things happening in our world, unlike any time in history, and an acceleration of those things.
Well, we like to address the audience, our friends who call themselves watchmen and women, and those who look at the end times and interpret daily events in light of Bible prophecy. They watch, warn, witness, and seek to finish well in these last days. So we like to give some specific application of the topic. Talk to them, Dr. Hitchcock, and what is the word for our watchmen?
Well, Jesus said, occupy until I come, do business until I come back. We need to have a sense of urgency, I think, about our lives today. We don't want to be people who are always sensationalizing everything. We don't want a sense of panic. God is in control. I reminded us of that earlier. There's never any panic in heaven. Someone said years ago, the Trinity never meets an emergency session. God's never, startled by things that are happening. We have to remember that. So we don't want panic, but we do need a sense of urgency, I think, in our lives today with what we see taking place. And rather than being fearful about what's happening as much, being anxious about what's happening and those kinds of things, we need to be active. We need to be in our local church. I think a lot of people, through COVID and all, a lot of people have not tied into their church like they should be, and being there and being with God's people. Sharing the good news of the gospel with those around us that desperately need the message of Jesus Christ. Doing the things that we can do through our families and our communities. And, in some ways, I look at the times we're in now, and people are, what do we do in these times in which we do? We really should be doing the basic main things we always do, as God's people. I think we do them now maybe with an increased sense of urgency. But, that's what I do every day. I get up every day. I pray. I ask God to use me to take my life and, navigate my life to where I'll come in contact with the people the Lord wants me to come into contact with. But I think, rather than maybe when we meet people, just overwhelming them with a bunch of information about all these things that are happening in the world, people are looking at us and looking at our lives, and they're going to see within us a sense of peace, a sense of calm in what's taking place, and that we have a purpose and we know what our destiny is in this world. And I think that will go a long way today in our society, in our country, in our communities, our families, our churches, to us being a witness for Christ and being about His business that He's called us to be about. So, I don't have any, special, secret sauce or silver bullet or something like that for what people should do. But it's to get up every day, to be filled with the Word of God, be filled with the Spirit of God, and go out each day as an ambassador for Jesus Christ, in these times in which we live. And I think if we do that, we'll be faithful to the calling that Jesus has given to us.
Well, those are some great applications. And again, Dr. Hitchcock, we thank you for being with us. We encourage people to check out marklhitchcock.com. And again, check us out at IamAWatchman.com. We want to thank you for listening today, and join us for more episodes at IamAWatchman.com or anywhere you pick up your podcast. And join us next time here on A View from the Wall.
A View from the Wall, in association with I Am a Watchman Ministries, exists to equip a worldwide audience with biblical truth, sharing it with others, and being prepared for Christ's imminent return. The team seeks to encourage, inspire, and equip watchmen for such a time as this. For information about the ministry and upcoming events, visit IamAWatchman.com. A View from the Wall is made possible by the team of dedicated pastors, editors, and the many contributors of I Am a Watchman Ministries. To support our efforts, give online at IamAWatchman.com and click on the Donate button. Thanks for listening, and join us again next time on A View from the Wall.